Hey everyone, with all the restoration work done on this Lowrider, no attention was made to the front suspension, and that became readily apparent during clutch testing when one fork seal blew out, followed by the other one a short time later. I didn't notice I was covered with oil. What I noticed was when I hit the front brakes, the whole bike sunk down forwards. So our last video started with the measurement of a seal to produce a tool to insert it properly into the bike. After rigorously cleaning and inspecting and assembling all the parts, the seal was installed. Everything was reassembled thereafter, filled with oil, closed up, and checked for leaks. No leaks were found after the rebuild, so we moved on to the second shock, where we kind of just skimmed through disassembly and cleaning this time. Finding that the bearings here at the stem were shot and would need to be replaced, we also started the disassembly here. After driving out the cups and races on both sides, we took everything to the bench. We could see that this screw was warbled out. We were able to remove this bearing with heat, and at that moment Jason came by to help assist with the fender. After all the parts were cleaned, orders were made for new parts, and we're back now ready to continue with Chapter 3 of this Harley-Davidson FX front-end rebuild series. Nothing will be done with the stem and bracket till we confirm with a new nut that the threads are okay, so we're going to put this off to the side for now. I'd like to have the neck on the bike cleaned up before the parts arrive so everything can be reassembled. However, after much work, this section is now cleaned out and all of these parts can be assembled as a single component and get it off the bench. This screw will receive one of the new seals supplied in the kit. I used the old seal just to clean everything out. Again, using sandpaper to check the face here where the outer portion of the seal will sit. Come to find that somebody used their teeth at some point to remove one of the seals. So I will flatten this section down where we see these notches, and then the RTV will fill it in because it's not too deep. Then cleaned up with a towel and brake cleaner for inspection. Everything looks good, we're ready to proceed. But before we do, I want to point out something that I missed in the last episode. I put the dust cap on, which admittedly did not fit, so I felt as good as the original. But what I did not do was put the chrome cover over the cap, which kind of compresses it down in the grooves. And when I do that, at that point, it becomes extremely difficult to remove the cap and cover, unless I specifically try and just pull the cover off separately. We can see that took a considerable amount of work. And once that's removed, the inner portion comes out with no problem at all. Like last time, applying a thin veneer of RTV around that mating surface. The rest of the installation proved to be identical and uneventful. This was all documented in the event there was some sort of special issue with this shock, but everything turned out to be pretty much the same. The only difference with this shock, after I had assembled it and filled it up with the 6 ounces of oil, I made sure that before I put the screw on top, that I correctly placed that chrome cap over the dust seal. Pumped up and checked for leaks around the seal, and everything here looks dry. I pushed down the dust seal into position, snapping it in, followed by the chrome cap, which sits snug over the dust seal, and now it's correctly installed, and I give it one last pump. The other shock was open so the chrome cap could be correctly installed. These shocks are done. I need to clean the threads on this fork stem. I don't know if I'm going to be saving this fork stem, so I don't want to invest a whole lot of time into it. But the threads have to be cleaned in order to test it against the new screw that's scheduled to arrive. And I see like Indian head shellac and RTV and thread locker all together on this thing. But once cleaned up, it really looks like these threads survived and it was the bolt that wore out. We won't know until the new end cap arrives, but it's a good sign. In the meantime, I have to clean up one of these steering head cups. I won't be reusing it, but I don't want to take it to the hardware store with me covered in grease and nastiness. That's good enough. Back to our Ace Hardware where this bike was built. This wash is too small, it would put pressure on the race. But this one right here covers the outer perimeter of the cup. This is just perfect. I did have to go to another store to find long enough bolts, but you do what you can. And here's the tool setup. I didn't want the bolts and zinc, but that's all they had, and that's fine. But this is what we're working with now. I have it mounted on the bike just for testing, and I wouldn't really press both in at the same time, though I'm just demonstrating both in the tool at the same time. But this neck is going to need some work. First, I'm using some penetrant just to soak into the rust, so I'm not kicking up a lot of dust later when I take out the drill and the brush. Hit the bottom too. Make sure I get inside there. And the drill makes easy work of this, as I'm careful to go around and clean up all those surfaces to remove that rust, most of which appeared to come from the cups and not from the neck itself, which is good. Wipe it down with a rag and some brake cleaner and we'll have a look and see how it's coming out. Yeah, that cleaned up like new. Same thing for the bottom. The bottom took a lot more work given the condition. Was no surprise looking at the condition of the cup. Took a couple of back and forth sessions of drill and then cleaning and inspect, but eventually the bottom cleaned up like the top did. At this point, any dust and dirt remaining inside here must be removed or it's going to end up in the bearings eventually. I'm happy with the results. Everything is looking good now. Ready to install the cups, press them in. Should go in a lot easier too now that everything is cleaned up. When that fork stem nut showed up, the first thing I wanted to do was test this out to find out if I was buying a new fork stem. The old nut's seen better days. Here's a new one. Tightening and checking at intervals. So far so good. I don't feel any wiggle or deflection like I did with the old nut. It looks like we may be okay. I'll screw it down all the way in, pretty much as it normally would be. And it's holding. So the problem was the nut because it's not wiggling at all. We got lucky. I don't have to replace the fork stem. We're not up to this part yet. I just wanted to check quickly. We'll continue. Here's the cup and race. Looks real nice. Race comes pre-installed as we see here. Going to press this right into the neck, but I'm going to add a little bit of oil right over here on this surface. Nothing crazy, just a small amount of oil. Place the cup into the neck. Eventually I'll feel resistance. Install our makeshift tool. Screw the pieces on the bottom. Once it's snugged down, I'll make sure everything is straight and centered. And using two adjustables because I just don't have this size in spanners, I'll start tightening it down and compressing it into the neck. At that point, the tool can be removed by loosening it, turning out the slack. And this one's done, perfectly seated. We can see nothing on the face was damaged by our tool, so we can proceed with the top one. And the top one, of course, is the same exact process, except it's on top. And because it's on top, it is in fact easier to install. And if you're paying attention, you may be saying, yeah, that went in way too easy on both of them. And you're right. Let me show you what happened. I've already fixed the top one, but I am going to show the bottom one, what I did here to repair this problem. When you look at the pattern of the metal, you can see there's a point where it's really worn down. It's really evident. Half a century of vibration and rust. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to peen a pattern in here, just a bunch of dimples. It's hardened steel on the end, so it leaves an impression in the metal. And I do this like 100 times. I'm not going to show each one, but just to give you an idea, I'll speed it up and stop and take a break for a moment so we can have a look at what's going on. I still have to even it out, but you get the idea. The metal gets deformed, so the inner diameter gets smaller. Now when I go and place it in, it stops right after the chamfer. Much better. And this time when I press that cup in, you better believe it's pressing it in. There is some resistance on there. Seated all the way to the top, perfectly pressed in. This is never loosening up. This turned out to be an easy and effective repair. Now we'll continue with the next portion of the build. I should have done this earlier, but I'm going to throw the stem and bracket into my freezer. I'll come back in a couple of hours. I quickly went and threw this onto the stem in the freezer as well. So these bearings look a little different. Apparently they're sealed bearings, but they're not cheap knockoffs. They're Timken bearings. They got this rubber seal on the bottom. I wonder if that's going to affect the installation any. Oiled but not greased. We're going to need to pack these bearings with grease before installation. Making sure everything is snug and centered in the tool. I'll connect my grease gun, for which I've installed a cartridge of bearing grease. And this one's going to take several pumps to get going because the fitting is new, so it's filled with air. But eventually we get the grease to the bearing right there, and then we're just going to keep going until the bearing is fully saturated with grease. Disconnect the bearing from the tool, remove the bearing and have a look, and this bearing is ready for installation. Pulling the stem and bracket out from the freezer, I don't have a whole lot of time to work, so I'm just going to work the bearing right on. There is an oil seal or a grease seal in the middle that makes it a little difficult initially, but it is cold and there is enough slack, so once I got it centered, it slides all the way down and seats just where I want it to. I tried to wipe off the grease, but it's acting like chewing gum because everything here is so cold. I'm just going to have to wait before I clean this up. In the meantime, I went and got the second bearing ready using the same process. However, this bearing we're just going to keep in the tool until we're ready for it, so I'll place it back down the bench. Everything here is now frosting up, and I'm going to have to wait till it comes to room temperature. We can see that as it warms up, it's condensating and there's water everywhere. Nothing I can do about it. I'll just move on to something else in the meantime. And that means cleaning the races with brake cleaner for the impending installation. It's my last chance to do so, and there was some dirt in here, so it's a good thing I did. Then I'll follow up by cleaning up the bottom race. At this point, I'll install that bearing into the top race, taking it right out of the grease packing tool. I place it right in just to distribute some of that excess grease right into the race. Move it back and forth, I lift it off, and then work that extra grease into the race with my finger. After the grease is evenly distributed, I place the bearing back down, moving it back and forth within the race and checking for proper fitment. Adding a little bit of grease to the back of the dust cover just so everything stays together. I place the dust cover on, and that's it. Grease is applied to the race on the underside as well. Stopping right here, I want to check the new fork stem nut and make sure it fits into this fitting at the middle of the upper bracket. The fit seems good with no binding, so we'll continue. We'll begin the installation now, but due to my setup, we're going to use a cable tie to secure it while we shift everything around, pushing it straight through the middle of the neck here, right up to the bearing so it seats in the race, holding that dust cap down. Everything worked out, no problem at all. However, we're going to put this cable tie through the alarm system here, just so it doesn't fall through and hit the floor while I'm trying to situate everything. That's all. Now we could move all of our stuff back into relative position, because we want to get that nut over to secure everything. Doesn't have to look nice, it just has to work. And the nut did drop down, so I'm turning it with my fingers, whatever I could grab to get it to turn, just so we could get it all secured, and we got it. Gently going a little bit further with the socket, just because the reach is easier. A couple of turns, that's all I'm doing. I'm just pulling out the slop, that's it. Now I can clip that cable tie, it's no longer needed. We're going to temporarily affix the headlight cluster in a position so it's not in the way. We're not going to install it all the way, just a couple screws to hold it. This will give us room to work. Stopping to remind myself the handlebars had some issues tightening down previously, I decided this would be a good time to address that issue, so I took a few minutes to take care of that problem. This was done on the outer cover as well. Carefully, I get my handlebars back in position as I smack into my tripod, so I could get everything back together without dropping anything onto my gas tank. Pop in the 4 screws that I just cleaned. And I'm bringing these bars up into relative position as I tighten it down. Obviously, this is not permanent. This is just to get it out of the way. I only set up the bars when I'm on the bike. I'm going to tighten down this pinch bolt, but only several foot-pounds, not to its final torque. I just want to take the slack out of it and provide a little bit of resistance. That's all. I'll come back later and set the final torque on this when we're done adjusting. The brake T-fitting screw can now be removed. As we set up the T-fitting, remembering to put that washer behind to offset that weld. I'll reinstall the T-fitting now under this bracket. I should remove that cable tie. Eventually I'll get tired of it and do so. And this bolt I'm going to torque down visually until the lock washer is compressed, trying to keep the T-fitting straight, which I'll fail at, but I'll come back later and straighten it out. Contrary to popular belief, I do not see what the camera sees. Moving on with the slightest touch of anti-seize in these surfaces to stop that rust from forming again and to make the installation easier, I just move around this very thin veneer of anti-seize with my finger. No tape means this is high side. I'm going to remove the cap now. I don't know if this applies to any other motorcycle on the planet of this model, but for whatever reason, this is how mine's set up. Contrary to everything the book says in instruction and picture, I put a slight amount of oil here for installation. Carefully sliding this piece up through that pinch fitting. It's going to end up reaching the top and stopping as it gets smaller into an interference fit like that. According to the book, I would now tighten this screw down to 35 foot-pounds. That was just a slop. Torque wrench at 35. Perfect. I screwed up. Let's put on the cover now and do it all over again. Now it's correct. Same exact procedure for the low side, except I won't mess up the cover this time. This one, however, cannot slide past the pinch point, so I'm going to have to do an audible here. Yeah, I tried for a couple of minutes. I couldn't get it. Using one of my broken flatheads as a wedge, I merely pried open a fraction of a millimeter, that pinch point on the top and bottom, to allow a little bit more clearance for that part to get in. That's it. Trying our second attempt now. We'll see if it was successful. We see immediately that everything's working fine now, so we'll bring this all the way up to the top. And it's seated just fine. As you can see, there is no way to put this in with the cap on top. Both of these shocks have been rotated to point the front towards the area less worn down by 50 years of sandblasting on the road. And this one was then torqued down to 35 foot-pounds. Slide down that cover and we should be good to go, right? Checking back and forth. Now that I got a little weight on it, how everything's sitting with the bearings, and it feels good. I think that preload is on point. These calipers got to come off though. They're going to come off anyway to be repaired. They might as well come off now. I do have an older video on the rebuild of these calipers. If you're interested in looking at it, you can click the link on the top right corner. We'll take you to it. Thought I'd take a moment to grab this section and try and jostle it compared to how it looked before the rebuild. This is night and day. I'll admit I can't find this in my manual, but if this top cap pulls up the shock, this bottom bolt will have to be loosened before I do it. This was an absolute nightmare trying to compress this spring with my hands and tighten this down without the motorcycle falling off the jack. Everything about this sucked. I thought maybe I'll move the headlight out of the way, that'll help. No, it won't. I tried everything. Push it down, hold it with my thumb as I turn it, that didn't work. The palm, that didn't work either. Try with different fingers. Try with a deep well socket, which won't work. Try with a deep well socket that I filled with paper so it won't sink into the socket. Try a couple times with that socket. And then I got it. It was the original thumb and twist method, but what you got to do is oil your thumb and the bolt before you push down. I'll demonstrate on this one. First, I'm going to lock the forks with a hex key. Then with an oiled thumb and an oiled face of the bolt, I'm able to push the bolt down and turn it. It won't bind as I turn it due to the oil, making the installation a lot easier. After a couple turns, it finds that thread, and you can see eventually it's captured, though I'll still be very hesitant to put my face in front of that till I get a couple turns on it, but it's in. At this point, I'll pull the slack in with the socket as it's easier to turn, and now there's no imminent danger of a bolt flying in my face. Installing these two bolts right here was probably the worst part of the project. There's no torque specification for these bolts, so I'm going to snug them all the way down and then just give them a little more snug and make sure that it pulled the shocks all the way up to the top of this bracket. And that's pretty much all I can do. Raising up this fixture now to check the clearance of the flat of the bolts, and they don't clear. You're going to have to loosen the lower pinch bolts so that the whole shock fixture can be rotated from this top nut. Rotate the work and check, and if it fits, retighten the lower pinch bolts. My bike may be the only one with this. It's not in the book, but it works. I'll do the other one now. This one's loosened on the bottom, so I'm able to rotate it slightly, and now this one fits as well. I can now permanently install the headlight fixture. I've retightened those pinch bolts down below to 35 foot-pounds yet again. Bringing the slack out of both headlight bolts and the fixtures laying on straight, I'll then snug them down, completing the installation of the headlight. From above, we could see the clearances between those bolts and the headlight console. It's not much. And that concludes part 3 in this series of this rebuild of the front end of this AMF Lowrider. I hope you found this video enjoyable, entertaining, and informative. Do me a favor, hit that like button down below, helps me out a lot when you do, and hit that subscribe button to be informed of more videos like this when they come out. Again, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Would you like to reply?